Good morning, everyone. You're listening to Mary in the Morning on 106.7 WSRT. We're talking about a topic that touches us in so many ways, that wonderful relationship between mothers and daughters. Some of us are on one side or the other, and some are doing both at the same time. So, Julie, I wanted to ask you about the relationship between women and their mother-in-law, which kind of takes an interesting twist. What can you tell us about that?
Well, we found two things. Obviously, we had the traditional scenario where the mother-in-law felt the daughter there were big issues between the mother and the daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law and the mother. What happened was the mother-in-law really wanted the daughter-in-law and the son to join a church, and they didn't, and she was constantly hounding them about that. And it was interesting because what one of our therapists said was, where is the son in all this? The son is totally out of the picture. The son was encouraged to intervene on behalf of the daughter and take a stand. And so that was a situation where it was, the mother-in-law was kind of the demon. But I have to say, one of the great surprises in writing this book was that we found in many instances where there was an adversarial relationship between the daughter and her mother, that the mother-in-law was often an incredible source of support. There wasn't the emotional baggage. There was one situation where the daughter-in-law was an Asian immigrant, and her mother was very sort of stoked in the old world values, gave her a hard time about a lot of things. But the mother-in-law really thought she was a terrific woman, and they had a great relationship. So I would say that it's really a mixed bag. Sometimes these can be adversarial relationships, but many times we found that the mother-in-law really was a wonderful ally for the daughter.
Well, it's a great relationship because it's like mother once removed.
Exactly. Right, with none of this sort of passion and emotional baggage and, memories of teen angst and all the rest of it with your own mother.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Now that women are waiting until they're a little bit older to have kids, there's now a larger gap in ages between moms and their daughters. And is that affecting anything? Because it used to be we were all pretty much 20 years, 22 years apart from each other. Now it can be 40 years.
That's a really good point. We found it manifested in other areas. One of the main ones was that because there was less of an age difference between mothers and daughters were often younger, first of all, when they had their children, and so they often turned to their mothers for parenting advice. They often lived near their mother. Today, women who postpone parenting are often quite highly educated. They often turn to books, experts, pediatricians, friends, the internet for advice. And they feel often that their own mother's advice is quite outdated. And that was a big source of conflict that we found when researching this book. And generally, it's this idea that the other part of that is that grandmothers are often much older when their grandchildren are born.
Sure.
So they may not be as able to be as active. I mean, there were some grandparents who were begging their daughters to leave the kids with them for the weekend. The daughters didn't feel like they were physically up to it.
Yeah.
So it's obvious. It's a good point you bring up. It's a very different dynamic.
Yeah, I can remember something that my mother's mother used to do to her in like a cocktail party setting. Would very loudly say, "Wasn't I a good mother?" and it was, and she was a horrible mother, and so it made it even funnier that she would ask it. But I think there are some mothers who do feel a certain bit of insecurity about how their daughter sees them as mothers.
Absolutely. And, at the same time that we really may lash out at our mothers, we want more than anything, we crave their approval of our choices. So you might have someone who's very accomplished in the workplace, and yet the one thing that she really wants on the home front is for her mother to say, "You're doing a great job." And the other thing that is, the mother may feel that, but she won't often say it.
Right.
We had one very interesting situation where the daughter was really offended because she felt her mother was always criticizing her parenting skills. She felt she was overprotective and smothering the daughter. And she emailed her mother, and the mother emailed back and said, "I think you're a great mother." But the two had never talked about that. The daughter had never said to her, "It makes me feel like you don't think I'm a good mother when you criticize me."
Right.
And then, so that kind of exchange, we sometimes simmer about these things, but we don't confront our mother and say, "Hey, why did you say that?" Or, do you think I'm not a good mother? And for the mother to say, "Of course I think you're a great mother."
Right.
That's a real breakthrough.
Well, and I also think adult daughters should, somehow find an opportunity other than Mother's Day to say, "Mom, you know what? You were a great mom to me."
Right, and that is something mothers really often don't hear. And
Never.
Mothers want to feel needed. This book did very well over Mother's Day, but I like to tell people this is not a Mother's Day book. This is an everyday book, and that's a really good point, because I find myself rarely saying to my mom, "Thanks for doing that," or when I do appreciate her and let her know about it, even little things like, well, we're coming for dinner. What can I bring? Well, you make the best salads, and I can't make salads at all. Or you make the best homemade soup. Can you please bring it? It just wouldn't be a meal without your homemade soup. The kids love it. Please bring it. And it's amazing how little things like that can really just pave the way for great communication.
That's so true. Okay, so I have to ask you. You wrote this book. How is your relationship with your mom?
My relationship has actually improved a lot since I wrote this book. Because, what happened was my mother was starting to be interviewed by people, and people were having to ask her.
I bet.
So we were able to have discussions about this, which was really important. And what I like to say is my mother is really like lots of mothers. She wants the best for me, but she often doesn't phrase it in a way that comes across that way. So I would say that we're much better at communicating. I tended to sort of lash out and slam the phone down, and I now feel like I will take the time to really phrase my messages in a more supportive and empathetic way. And by the same token, I see her sort of thinking before she says things, or would you mind if I offer my advice on this? Would it be okay? She's very cautious, which has been I think a very positive benefit of this book, not one that I necessarily would have expected going into it. Now, she is who she is, and she's always going to want to offer her advice, even when I tell her often I don't want to hear it.
Right.
But I think we're at a better place.
Well, and what about your relationship with your daughter? Do you think this is, because now she's just going to wag this book in your face when she...
Yes, it's funny because she really hasn't read it. Well, the 17-year-old is 17.
Yeah.
So she's at an interesting point where she's wanting to be as independent from her family, and especially from me, as possible.
But she's supposed to feel that way at 17.
That's right. And so she is not in a position to listen and that sort of thing. But the one area where I feel like this book will help me in the future, the difference is when a child is living under your roof and they're a minor and you're supporting them, I think it's your job to shape them. Let them go their own way, but when you feel they're on the wrong path, you got to pull them back. When the child is grown and away from home and no longer a child and is on their own, I think that's a different story. And so what I always say is that whatever path they choose, even if it's something I would never have done, if it makes them happy, then I'm going to support them.
Right, absolutely.
And that's what this book really has taught me, where I might have not been so happy to do that before.
Sure. Okay, well, it's a great book. I really enjoyed reading it, and on the show we've been doing the multiple choice questions of how would you react as both a mother and a daughter to different situations, and it was a great conversation starter among me and my girlfriends who are in their 40s, so we're both moms and daughters.
Oh, great.
And it made for great conversation. So I encourage everyone, pick up this book. It's called Making Up with Mom, Why Mothers and Daughters Disagree About Kids, Careers, and Casseroles, and What to Do About It. The co-authors are Julie Halpert and Deborah Carr. It's out by St. Martin's Press. You can get it on Amazon, any local bookstore. And you have a website that you'd like people to know about.
Right. The website is www.makingupwithmom.com.
Excellent. All right. Well, Julie, thank you very much. And are there future books in store from you?
I don't know. I was thinking it would be great to have a whole Making Up With series. But we haven't gotten that far, so we'll see.
All right. Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
And thank you.
All right. We'll be back with more of Mary in the Morning on 106.7 WSRT.